there was just a one sentence that came up that still sticks with me all the time, and that is simply that what is not measured is not managed. I can't tell you how many times we've brought it up at work, the conversations we've had, the things that we've done, the changes we've made. If you're not measuring something, how can you be managing it?
Welcome to the Vegalogue podcast, a dialogue about the Australian vegetable industry from your peak industry body, AUSVEG. I'm your host, Tom Bicknell. In this episode, we speak with AUSVEG's Lucy Gregg about a number of developments looking at the competitiveness and conduct of the retail sector, as well as taking a look at the new National Vegetable and Onion Benchmarking Program. We'll also be speaking with Robert Arvier of West Pine Ag, who earlier this year was named the Corteva Agriscience Young Grower of the Year at the Horticulture Awards for Excellence. So let's dive into it with Lucy. I'm back with Lucy Gregg, AUSVEG's National Public Affairs Manager. Thanks for joining me again, Lucy.
Thanks, Tom, for having me.
So let's talk retail. There's a lot going on in the retail sector at the moment. In the past few months, or just in the past month, we've had both Coles and Woolworths report their profits. And in the middle of a cost of living crisis, they have received an unsurprising backlash from consumers. And the feelings of many growers are pretty similar, given the cost pressures they're facing from the retailers. So it's quite timely that just as those profit figures came out, a few things have been announced that are turning the spotlight onto retailers. So first off, let's talk about the federal government's new competition policy review. What's that all about?
Yes, we welcome the announcement for the review into competition policy. It's going to take into consideration quite a few different aspects of competition policy, but obviously from our perspective, the review into retailers and also other aspects of the supply chain, mergers and acquisitions is another area of interest to the industry. We are seeing the fact that, with mergers, there is lack of competition as well, particularly from big inputs. So, look, we certainly welcome the review and we'll be feeding into that, when required, and we'll certainly be pushing for the review of the Food and Grocery Code, which we understand is going to be undertaken later this year as well.
So fairly early days for that. The other thing that's happening at the moment from the government is the annual survey of suppliers from the Food and Grocery Code Independent Reviewer. Perhaps you could take us through who the independent reviewer is and what this survey is intended to achieve.
Yes, so the independent reviewer, Chris Leptos, is appointed to review I guess the Food and Grocery Code, if there are any dissatisfied suppliers who feel that the code arbitration process has failed. So it's sort of a backup mechanism. So if a supplier has gone to a code arbiter, and all of the 4 retailers have code arbiters, and feels as though they haven't got the outcome that they wanted, they can then put a complaint in to the independent reviewer. So through that process, the independent reviewer can seek some more information, they can review the complaint, they can even refer it back to the code arbiters to have another look at if he thinks that they have, interpreted it incorrectly. And he also has the power to refer things to the ACCC. So the code arbiter, they work with, obviously Coles have an arbiter which works with coal suppliers, et cetera, but the independent reviewer, he will take complaints from any of the suppliers.
For anyone who's not aware, could you maybe tell us what the Food and Grocery Code is? It's a big question, I know.
That is a big question, and obviously it's a voluntary code at this stage, and certainly that's probably one of the things that will come under consideration with a review later this year is should the Food and Grocery Code be mandatory. So it's an outline of I guess, acceptable behaviour and making sure that there is a fair and effective relationship between suppliers and the retailers. Does it go far enough? One would argue that it potentially doesn't. And that's certainly one of the things that we will be putting forward in our submission when it opens up later this year. We know that growers frequently have issues, but they often keep quiet because they fear retribution or fear they'll lose contracts or feel that it might penalise their commercial relationship. So, and whilst they can go through the code arbitration process, some still feel uneasy going through that. And I think that's also something that we need to promote more, is the fact that the code arbiters, do need to respect the privacy of the growers and understand, the sensitive commercial relationships that do exist. So, always encourage growers to have conversation and, with the arbiters first, and then just feel comfortable, before they proceed, further. But we certainly encourage them, to approach a code arbiter if they're not happy, but certainly would encourage everyone to do the review survey, which is out at the moment.
Yes, so that survey closes on the 3rd of October, so we encourage all vegetable suppliers who deal with the supermarkets to fill it out. You can search for the Food and Grocery Code Independent Reviewers Annual Suppliers Survey on Google, or you can find the link in AUSVEG's advocacy update email sent on the 4th of September. Lucy, we're also doing our own survey along these lines at the moment, aren't we? Do you want to maybe talk about the Price Transparency Survey?
Yes, we've got a survey out at the moment with growers to record on a weekly basis some of their invoicing, and also looking at the retail sector as well. So, the aim of that is to look at some of the trends that are happening, and also get some of the sentiments back from the growers. It's been a particularly challenging time at the moment with pricing, and I think we made the comment the other day that, just because they're vegetables doesn't mean they need to be dirt cheap. And, you only have to look around the supermarkets at the moment to understand that, vegetables have not been this cheap for a long time. So we, in this cost of living, crisis, certainly consumers should be able to find some really good options, but does it come at the cost of the growers? So we know that margins are very lean, if not negative at the moment, and that's not sustainable. So the Price Transparency Survey is hoping to unpack some of that, and get a better feel and indication of sort of where some of the margins are, and where we can hopefully influence more.
So for any growers who are interested in learning a bit more about that survey, how can they get in touch with you?
They can just email me or call me. The survey is anonymous, and non-identifiable, and we certainly will be looking at more the trends than specific line items to specific supermarkets. That's not what it's all about. It's basically looking at how, even to some extent, seasons like this compared to 12 months ago, how things can change. But at the end of the day, we need to have a sustainable industry, and that's not happening at the moment.
Well, Lucy, thank you very much for the update.
Thank you.
You're listening to the InfoVeg Radio podcast, brought to you by AUSVEG. You can't manage what you can't measure, goes the old adage. And while most vegetable growers are pretty adept at measuring what happens in the field, many don't have as much experience measuring in the office. Turning that around is the goal of a new levy-funded project announced by Hort Innovation in June, which will help growers benchmark their businesses against national and regional averages. The National Vegetable and Onion Benchmarking Program will help growers track their own performance against industry averages and best-in-class performance, providing the opportunity for positive practice change and growth. It's grown out of a previous levy-funded project benchmarking West Australian vegetable growers, the WA Vegetable Industry Benchmarks, run by Vegetables WA and agricultural consulting firm Planfarm. The new national project is also being run by Planfarm, supported by RMCG. To understand what growers can get out of the program, I spoke with Planfarm's Director of Horticulture, Paul Omodei, as well as Peter Dobra, the R&D Manager at the Loose Leaf Lettuce Company, a WA grower involved in the earlier project. Thank you very much for joining me, Paul and Peter. Paul, we hear a lot about growers these days operating in a very data-rich environment. They've got detailed information about their production, inputs, weather, etc. But this project isn't looking in the field, is it?
No, it's not, Tom. It's purely about the business metrics of a vegetable or onion business. So we're deep diving into the financials that go through the business from a cost and income point of view, and what that looks like as the business model. So it's a real deep dive into someone's financials and business structure, really, in terms of, when I say business structure, how they operate. So not necessarily whether they're a company or a trust is not really the issue. It's more about how their business operations operate and how that actually turns into income and profit for hopefully many.
And this is all pretty commercially sensitive ground. How do you manage the privacy concerns that growers might have about sharing this information?
Yeah, most definitely, Tom. It's something that is absolutely paramount in our business as Planfarm, as a consultancy now across Australia that covers over 500 businesses in Western Australia, and now into these horticultural projects, financials, production information is all highly confidential. So we have a server access only to our consultants. The information is only shared from a report basis and financial analysis basis with the client. If they so choose to share with their accountant or bank manager, that's totally their prerogative, but only the client will see the information that we gather for them and put together for them in an individual report. And we do benchmark clients within states and then across states in this project. It's a national project. And what we do there is what's called de-identified aggregated data. So that means that each individual grower gets a number, a specific number, and there's nothing in that data set that can actually determine where that grower may be. So size in terms of area, hectares, or postcode or anything like that. So when that de-identified data goes to the funders, pretty much Hort Innovation, and we appreciate that, then they know nothing about the individual grower. It's all just a number to them. So that's, the confidentiality is absolutely key to us, because any sort of leak of any data outside of our server and outside of this project pretty much means the end of our business, and that's not what we want.
And Peter, you were involved with the earlier WA benchmarking project that I guess was the precursor for this national project. What do you think growers can learn by comparing those parts of their business against others in their district and nationally?
Yeah, look, Tom, I think in reality, growers keep information close to their chest. They're not really willing to share very often. I mean, I think that's something you see in the industry for a long time, but I think that's starting to change, and I think there's a bit of a turn at the moment, and we're definitely seeing that here. We've been involved since the start of the benchmarking process, and I think the advantages for us have been massive, and they've been very obvious once we've gone through the process. I think the first step there, I guess, in that benchmarking part, to see where you're sitting within the industry. So is our business sitting in, the top 25% and the next 25%, or are we sitting in the bottom down here? It gives you an idea of where you are efficiency wise. And I think that's a great concept, but I think that's only the first step. I think the main step after that is really where the big benefit starts. And I think that's what you'll see with what Paul's saying here, is that there's a massive focus into your own business. You're looking into all your costs. You're looking into breaking down, like for us, we looked into breaking down by product. Now we do a whole bunch of different products, and To tell you the truth, some of those products we were either making next to nothing or we're actually going backwards. That was something that became very obvious. I think it's easy to look at the end of the year and look at your whole business and say, look, we've done this well, we've made this profit. But during that year, if you're doing 12 different products and you've gone backwards in 2 products, it may well be, you may be much better off to remove those 2 products from your growing or your processing completely, and then your efficiency goes through the roof. There are probably 2 things that really stick in my mind with regards to the process we've gone through with Planfarm especially, and that is the operating efficiency, and try to hit that operating efficiency. That means that's the target we're trying to hit, and their help in guiding us in what to do to reach that efficiency. And then the other thing, which is probably more from the first part of the benchmarking, it just sticks in my mind. There was just a one sentence that came up that still sticks with me all the time, and that is simply that what is not measured is not managed. And I think the first time I heard that, it just sunk into my head, and I can't tell you how many times we've brought it up at work, the conversations we've had, the things that we've done, the changes we've made, that if you're not measuring something, how can you be managing it? And then the processes and the changes we've made have been enormous in order to get the benefits that we have so far. So I think, how could people benefit? It's hard to explain until you actually go through it, I suppose. But I guess the first step is seeing in where you sit with regards to the industry as a whole, and then looking internally at your own business and your processes and where your spending is and where your costs are really coming in. It's an enormous process to go through.
Yeah, and what Peter and his family did really well, Tom, in the early days was benchmark against themselves. They had a number of years of data, and that's really important. This is just not a 1-year project. This is a project that lasts for 5 years. And the more years of data you get, the more it banks up on top of each other that you can actually compare against yourself. So benchmarking can be seen as a bit of a fluffy word in a way, because it doesn't always, if you're just benchmarking and not really diving into the business, what the output of this project is a benchmark data set. What's really important is that the deep dive into each individual business is about that individual business. So that's where it's not just a whole heap of data coming into Planfarm server and benchmarking it. It's actually, what does it look like for the Dobra family with their business? What does their business model look like? And how is every dollar they spend being turned into income? And that's what Peter was mentioning about operating efficiency. And that is just the key to any business. It's the midfield generator. It's the engine of any business. And that's the important thing that we dive into, and we match up production with financials. So often, we work with a lot of accounting firms in Broadacre in particular, and a few more now in horticulture. And each type of business, accounting or advisory, consulting advisory, has its different areas. And one thing that we do on top of the tax accounting and structure is actually look at how production and production measures turn into income and profit. And I think that's a real benefit in this project, is that matching up. What are you doing in the field? How is that working? What are you doing in the shed if it's processing? And how does that flow through to the bottom line? So we certainly don't tell growers how to do what they do, because they generally do it really, really well. It's looking at that inside their business to actually help them with that.
And I understand from the previous WA project, this was the first time that many growers had actually worked with a farm business consultant. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, many of them have very strong accounting relationships, which their tax accounting and their accounting year was managed extremely well. See very good tax management structure as well, Tom. So that's an important part of an accountant's role, is the structure of the business and how they can flow through income into different entities. But for many, there was never the actual match-up of production. What are we doing in the field? What are we doing in our business? And how does that look in terms of at what we call the year of effort? And that's the year that you produce and sell. Doesn't necessarily mean it lines up to the tax year. So in horticulture in WA and the southern regions, the year of effort does line up with a tax year, that July to June, so the production year. But as you go a bit further north, as you go into Carnarvon, as you go into lower areas of Queensland, across Australia, they run a bit more on a calendar year. So that's the year that we look at. So we're looking at what actually happened in that year of effort to produce the product, sell it, and then what came out the other end. So it's a little bit different to taxation.
And looking at the previous project, are there any examples of business improvements that growers made that could show the potential of the national project?
Yeah, I think Peter's mentioned a couple of his. I think their family is a classic in actually deep diving into product lines, and that was a real area that came out of the first part of the projects and probably instigated this next phase to go international. So that's one area that growers can look at. But I think the number one, I would say, Tommy, is actually looking at the operating efficiency in a business and working out what the next year looks like, whether there's cost increases. And one thing we did last year for all of the growers was a cost price analysis. So we looked at what costs were going up because we knew that wages were going up. We knew that fertiliser was going up, fuel, freight. So all of those major costs in a horticulture business were all going up. So what we were trying to develop for the grower was, if your business is faced with these cost increases and you maintain the current level of operating efficiency, then what does that mean for the price and the production at the other end that you need to get? And what we're able to do is help growers in parts of their negotiations with their suppliers to negotiate on price. Now, that's not always the case in every horticulture business, but it was certainly a big area that actually helped the growers in their discussion with their suppliers to actually say, well, look, this is what it's doing to my business. How can we negotiate to actually make sure that I can get some of that back? So, and for many, that was just to cover the costs, Tom. It wasn't actually to make any more profit. So I think that was a big win last year, was actually helping that discussion, that conversation with their suppliers and those that are buying their products to actually make sure that they were getting a fair price for what their business could generate.
Yeah, really one of the big things for us with the interaction with Planfarm and being involved in this project was being able to address pricing with regards to the costs. Now, specifically for us during COVID, costs have gone through the roof. And by each year being involved with Planfarm, with the project, we've been able to review our pricing over and over and over. If we got to the end point here at the end of COVID, or somewhat the end of COVID now, and we were trying to get to the operational efficiency we would want to get to, there's no way we could implement a price increase that covers everything over the past 3 to 5 years. But Planfarm has helped us to realise our costs on an ongoing basis in order to cover those cost increases by adjusting our pricing, and it's been at an acceptable level to our clients, and therefore we've been able to stay at a level of efficiency that's really kept the business going.
And looking ahead at this new national project, what's the timeline that you're working towards?
Yeah, so we're virtually getting into business analysis now, virtually across the nation. So we've joined forces with a business called RMCG in the east, a very popular and well-known consultancy firm based in a number of states in the east coast. So we'll work with them over the different states in gathering data, meeting growers, deep diving into their individual businesses, and then bringing that together as a national benchmark across Australia, but also done by state. So that will be starting very, very soon, Tom, and then this will continue on for the next 5 years. So we'll be looking to deep dive into hopefully 150 plus businesses over the country over a 5-year period. So we'll build up over the years and bring more growers in as we go, because you can't do everything in 1 year, but certainly we'll be aiming to get a good number of growers in this first year across Australia, and then build that up over the next 5.
So you're recruiting growers at the moment. If people are interested, where can they find out more?
Yep, certainly. So if you're in the eastern states, in Victoria, Tasmania, New South Wales, RMCG is the business to contact, and they've got a contact person in there. Just search up them on the website and get their contact details, and the same in WA, South Australia, and Queensland will be Planfarm. So yeah, if the growers are interested, they can search those 2 names, and it'll take them to where they need to go to get in contact with us.
Well, Paul Omodei from Planfarm and Peter Dobra from the Loose Leaf Lettuce Company, thanks very much for walking us through the project and joining me today.
Thanks,
Tom. It's a pleasure.
If you would like to know more about the project, contact Stephanie Carstairs at Planfarm at steff@planfarm.com.au. This project is funded by Horn Innovation using the vegetable and onion levies and contributions from the Australian Government under project code MT22009. If you don't inherit a family farm, it's very difficult these days for young vegetable growers to start out on their own. Not just finding a property to start on, but also being able to bring in enough revenue to pay the bills on a smaller, still developing vegetable operation can be a big challenge. Overcoming those challenges has taught 2023's Corteva Agriscience Young Grower of the Year, Robert Arvier of West Pine Ag, some important lessons. And he told AUSVEG's Deborah Hill that he hopes other young growers looking to build a new, sustainable business can learn from his journey.
Rob, thanks for joining us today and congratulations on being named the Corteva Agriscience Young Grower of the Year for 2023. Rob, the operations you've established at West Pine Ag in Penguin on the northwest Cape of Tasmania, prior to that you were in Victoria, so what was your journey and background in Tasmania and how have you ended up back there?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Tasmania, and whilst we moved around quite a bit as kids with my parents' work, we've always been from there. I went to high school in Tas and then also attended UTAS for my bachelor's degree. So it's always been home. And Rihanna, the community I grew up in, is a very rural area and likely had a huge influence on the career path.
You said you went to the Uni of Tas. I assume that's to do the agronomy degree.
Yes, that's right.
What drew you back into running your own property? I gather you didn't have a family history of farming.
No, for sure. So I actually had a very short tenure in agronomy. I did about 2 years with a pyrethrum company and then moved into environmental management and compliance and heavy focus on business strategy and financial management. So that's been the majority of my career. But from the early days with the pyrethrum company, I was heavily interested in the farming aspect of what they were doing, and also before that growing up, our neighbouring businesses. So mum and dad's house was surrounded by commercial farms. So again, a huge influence there. And I think I've always been drawn to wanting to be involved in the primary production side rather than just advice.
Many young farmers find themselves farming through inheritance from their parents and their grandparents, not having had a family farm yourself. Do you think that's changed your focus on how you farm compared to those that are generational farmers?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's crucial to have a different way of thinking. Also, I guess for us, risk is the biggest thing, climatic and economic. We don't have the ability to fall back on massive overdrafts or a trading history that goes across generations or land ownership. So everything we own or purchased is leveraged with commercial rate debt. So if it's not serviceable, we've got a problem, just like any business. So it's not a complaint, but for us, it's key to managing those two elements. And we're finding that the processes and markets that we have now are starting to recognise the need for shared risk modelling when it comes to cropping production. We aren't able to take the hit of entire crop failure across more than half of the business. It's just not, I'd say not palatable, but it's not possible. If that was to happen, then we can't meet our servicing requirements or pay our people, and that's never something we're prepared to entertain. So diversification's been absolutely crucial.
How did you come to establish the Penguin property then, and what was your vision for it?
Yeah, so I think, to be honest, it was an 18-hectare block. It was only ever viewed as a hobby block, so that's about 10 years today, purchased that property. Despite constant encouragement from neighbours, there wasn't a vision for it to be a commercial farm because I just simply did not see a pathway for that happening. It was a place to run a few cattle and live in a rural area.
So what does it look like now? I mean, clearly, given your background in commercial pyrethrum, there's a clear focus on having 18 acres succeed.
Yeah, so today we're a farm and project management business first and foremost. Natural capital and impact is core to everything that we do, but we're heavily diversified. So whilst the farm is something that I'm extremely passionate about and really keen to see that business grow, without the environmental consultancy and our specialty grocery business, we wouldn't be where we are today. We're employing 12 people across Tasmania and Victoria, and we're growing actively, particularly in that natural capital space.
In terms of produce, what are you actually growing?
So northwest coast of Tasmania is extremely lucky with access to market. So we're growing the full suite of vegetables for fresh market and process operators. Potatoes, carrots, onions, brassicas, fodder and cereals are our primary focus.
You mentioned that focusing on your capital improvement was important. Of the innovative solutions you've tried to make that happen more so on such a small property, what's been successful and what really hasn't worked?
So I guess on the farm side, we've ironically had a rocky time with pyrethrum, which you wouldn't think given my early experience with it. So it's an innovative crop that is grown here, obviously not a vegetable, but we've found that the fluctuations in yield that you can get, growing the crop under excellent conditions, sit outside of what we can, I guess, take from a risk appetite perspective. So we're really hoping to see that becomes a more robust offering in the future, because things like that, despite being innovative and really interesting for us, are things that economically can't support our business. But in terms of things that we have tried or initiated, the most successful and least successful fall into the same category, and that's on-farm bioenergy. So over the last few years, we've been a key member of a project to produce heat energy for 2 hospitals in Victoria from cereal straw residue. So that's taking straw that would have been traditionally burnt in field and turning it into either high density square bales or pellets to be used as biofuel. So extremely rewarding project for increasing rural resilience, reducing energy costs, reducing farm emissions, and increasing value to farmers where they previously didn't have it. Having said that, we invested heavily in some pelletization equipment from Europe, and whilst early days were very promising, unfortunately the local support disappeared for that technology despite its success in Europe. So that has ended up being an extremely costly lesson for us, in that if the people who supply the servicing and technology to that equipment, it doesn't matter how cool or fancy it is, without them, it's very hard to have a piece of gear that's not supported in our country. But that says more about Australia than the equipment manufacturer.
That's true. Quite a lot of new ag tech, isn't it? You really need that localised support in order to keep it going when you need it.
Yeah, I think so. We've had many representations from people in other areas, whether it's in veg or fodder or similar things to us, where you've got the first of a technology to find that in Australia, unfortunately our retailers are focused mostly on margin rather than support. And we really need that innovation that we see in Europe and the US, where those machinery partners, whether they're global or local, are absolutely wedded to the success of the market, because we have had a piece of equipment that was producing a very, very valuable product in a great format for all of the customers that were using it. But without that support, we're not engineers, we didn't build the equipment, so you absolutely rely on that no matter what sector you're in.
In terms of other innovations that you've looked at for reducing your carbon footprints, are there other elements that you are looking to incorporate or have tried in the past?
Yep, so the focus hasn't shifted at all on energy from crop residue. We're now using square bales for that project rather than pellets. So a far more robust technology for Australia. So we haven't changed. I guess it was a slight blip in the project overall, but yeah, we're heavily focused on the success of that with a number of partners, which is really exciting. And the other big one for us is we're just in the final stages of commissioning a molasses extract project in Victoria. So that's a partnership with an agri-food business, LaSalle Group, and taking the molasses extract that they have as a co-product from their bakery facility and then manufacturing that into a fertiliser and stock feed material or ingredient. So they have been the big ones for the next year.
Are there other projects that you've looked at with the view of having a lower carbon footprint within the vegetable space?
Yeah, so on the farm, the guys there are currently working on accounting methods for our carbon emissions and biodiversity metrics, which is extremely complex, as I'm sure you're aware. I think one of the things we're a bit surprised by is that there isn't a consolidated method across our industry that anyone can point to say, here's who you need to speak to. So we've started with an accounting methodology via our own accountant and also a software provider to take an invoiced-based approach to looking at where our emissions come from or where we can improve. Biodiversity is tricky, and at the moment we're talking to people about using DNA in soils and water resources to actually assess, are we doing better? What can we do to change our practices? So that's a really huge piece of work, but we're excited about it. Irrigation infrastructure and automation has been a huge one over the last 2 years for us. So we've invested heavily in that space. And we've also participated in a project led by AgLogic and the Drought Hub in a weather station network and associated soil moisture integration. So starting to put those learnings into practice in terms of moving from the shovel to using information that is really binary from what our soils are telling us for whether it's a root vegetable or something that's more surface driven. And then, alongside the veg, we're also taking part in a substantial Landcare Tasmania project in a 10-hectare revegetation site along the Penguin Creek. This is an area that was inappropriately cleared in the past for vegetables, but presents a landslip risk, and if you were to see it, you'd think that it's crazy that anyone ever thought that would be a viable, arable site. So really excited to take part in that, but it's going to be one that'll take a number of years to get right.
In terms of the award for the Young Grower of the Year, what does that represent for you?
Oh, look, it's extremely humbling. We were really excited to have taken part in the program, and obviously a big surprise given, I guess, the field of incredibly talented people that were there this year and what they were doing around the country. But from my side, I think everything I've done from a business point of view is in collaboration. That award belongs not only to me but also the entire group of staff across the business who have made that happen. We've got an incredibly talented farm manager, David, who is putting into practice all of the things we've just talked about. Yeah, the award, I guess, just being really clear that it's something that belongs to the business. We've got a really core group of people in the business and outside the business from a stakeholder point of view that have really pulled together what we've achieved. And I guess the thing that sets us apart from the vegetable growing side is those adjacent space things that have enabled the business to succeed. From a vegetable farm point of view, we've got plenty of people around us that are doing great things that are on a much larger scale, have higher levels of technology than what we do. So yeah, we're certainly not standing out there as the best farmers, but we really want to be there, and it's a great field of people to be involved with.
As a young grower, then, what advice would you give to other growers in terms of giving it a go and how they could potentially better their own farms?
I think from my perspective, collaboration, formal educational and practical experience are really key. One of the things I probably should have started earlier in my career was training in financial management and business strategy. I was focused on only practical and, I guess, scientific agronomy, which is great, and there's amazing careers to be had there. But in terms of moving that into a business ownership or farm ownership, I think the financial literacy is something that is really, really critical to understand on a fundamental level very early on, because as we mentioned before, servicing debt now with commodity prices where they sit, it's a really, really fine balance, and you need a really, really good support network of knowledge around you to get there. And, coming back to the collaboration, whilst I haven't inherited a farm, it's really important to recognise that I have had support. My parents cross-guaranteed my first property, and I leased equipment and land from very supportive neighbours in the early days as well. So whilst I like to think that I've given back to all of those people, as is the nature of collaboration, without their support and their belief that I would succeed, I wouldn't be here, the same as with the staff group that are there. So I think that having those relationships early on are also really, really critical to succeeding.
Well, Rob, thank you so much for speaking with us today, and congratulations again on your award. It's been a pleasure to chat with you.
Thanks so much, Deborah.
Thanks for listening to InfoVeg Radio. Don't forget to subscribe and give the podcast a rating and review to help others find us. InfoVeg Radio is produced by AUSVEG, the peak industry body for Australian vegetable growers. You can find more news and information from AUSVEG at ausveg.com.au, on our social media channels, or in Australian Grower magazine. See you next time.